Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to another DM's Guild review, my written and video review series. We take a look at the adventures and supplemental material at the Dungeon Masters Guild website. With this video, I'll be reviewing the dungeon adventure, Real Dungeons number 2, the Well of Mitu Hatsep, designed by Peter Charron for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. This review has been sponsored by the publisher, and a review copy has been provided for the purposes of this review. If you are interested in a sponsored review, you can reach me via email, Twitter, or Discord, or my submission form at roguewatson.com. If you enjoy the content, consider using my affiliate links for online shopping and supporting me via patreon.com/roguewatson. Some of you may recall I did a review of Real Dungeons number 1 called The Buried Palace, which is this designer's inspiration towards creating dungeon crawl adventures that are based on real-world historical archaeological finds that could be considered a modern-day dungeon crawl, but obviously still with a D&D bent. I was not very positive on that adventure, however. In fact, I was highly critical. I thought it was mostly very empty and bland, didn't have much going on for it. So I went into this one thinking, what are we going to get here? I am very, very pleased to announce that not only is this dungeon adventure much more improved over the first one, but I would go as far to say this is one of the better dungeon crawls I have had the pleasure of reviewing in a long time. I really, really enjoyed, first of all, the adventure that actually surrounds this dungeon crawl, but also the dungeon itself is so meticulously crafted and intricately designed, and it just feels like the best parts of a more, Tomb Raider or Indiana Jones style dungeon, where it's still all rooted in kind of real world logic, but there's also a little bit of, or like the Mummy, for example, where there's maybe a little bit of supernatural stuff happening, but a lot of it is, physical traps and things, and it's just, I will go over it, but I am so positive on this adventure. I was very, very impressed. Huge improvement over the first one, and you do not have to play the first one. These, even though these are part of technically a series, they don't have anything to do with each other plot-wise. It's just, this is like the designer saying, I'm going to make this series of adventures that are inspired by real-world locations. In this one, it is based on the Alexandrian catacombs known as Kom el Shakafa. I have no clue how to pronounce these correctly, which was discovered in 1900 and dates back to the 2nd century. So it's a classic Egyptian tomb, which I think is what a lot of us think of with cool dungeon crawls, right? A very, very classic theme. You can already probably in your head start connecting together the little pieces and rooms and things. There's probably a mummy at some point. There's some jackal-headed people. There's got to be some sand traps. And it has a lot of that stuff in here, and yet none of this feels like I've seen it before, which is really pretty interesting, because I feel like this is probably one of the more common themes, maybe not in D&D, but like classic pop culture, and yet I think it's just fantastically done to where I was very, very impressed with this whole thing. So it's not really divided into parts, but you could consider part 1 is kind of the background information, and the players get to this town. This is the town of Tayum, which is a desert town. And there's a little bit of a trick here that the DM has to pull off, but essentially this town is full of cultists, and there's a whole big backstory here, which thankfully does actually play into the plot and adventure, where there was this ancient king who was probably an evil king and was going to get turned into a mummy, but before he could be fully, transformed, this other group of rebels basically stole the body and moved into the desert, and there was kind of this cool like backstory involving these gods. And they built this tomb inside of this well to keep him there. But then the other faction, his loyalists, have been working for centuries to try to get this certain item and be able to basically resurrect him and have all these things fall into place. And of course, that's what's fixing to happen here, is they need to get this one MacGuffin item from this dungeon in order to resurrect their mummy lord. So the cool thing is, it's the actual evil cultists that end up hiring the players, because they say, hey, a bunch of bad guys, which this is the interesting part, like, they're being truthful when they say it. They're just, the duplicitous part is they're the ones that are doing it. They're saying a bunch of cultists came in and kidnapped our kids. They're up to no good. They demand in ransom that somebody gets this artifact, which is this heart scarab from this dungeon at the bottom of this well, which, we had no idea there was down there and all this. And the players say, okay, yeah, and they'll of course have this NPC join the players named Ozrit, who will know, limited amount of information, but he's in on it the whole way, and he's trying to get his hands on the actual heart scarab. And I love this twist, and I think a lot of these are very hard to pull off for a DM, and I think this one can be pulled off. There's just really fun ways the designer has built in, especially towards the end, where the Osprey has to like swipe the scarab, but even if he doesn't get it, like the plot can still kind of work. Even if they find out about him, the plot can still kind of work, because they ultimately have to go rescue these kids anyway, because that part is truth. Like, the cultists did come in and steal the kids. The part they don't know is that the town is the goddamn cultists, and they're the ones that just stole their own kids in order to go on this to complete this ritual, which is really creepy. That you meet like the one guy, and it's actually he's like the boss at the end, the guy who's the mayor of the town basically. And he's, you talk to him, and then he's the big boss villain, kind of like a horror movie at that point, with the classic like cult where the whole town's like in on the cult, and he's like sacrificing his own grandson and all this at the end. That's all a very cool wrapping around this adventure. The meat of the adventure is going to be this actual dungeon crawl, which is the Well of Mitu Hatsep, and it is at the bottom of this well, and it is just an awesome, like, I think it's about 21 room dungeon crawl, and you've got that NPC with you, but otherwise it's just such a good mix of puzzles and exploration and traps. There is some opportunity for combat. It's not like you don't have any combat, but it's used very sparingly in a way we don't usually actually see very often in a D&D game. We see a lot more combat than this. In fact, I just recently reviewed a bunch of Spelljammer layer books, which was almost nothing but combat. Almost felt like it was a Diablo game or something, which going room to room, and that can be fine. People like combat. This is going to be in the opposite end of the spectrum. So if you like a lot of combat and your players aren't into, hieroglyphs and checking walls and secret traps and like a classic Tomb Raider, or like maybe even a Zelda dungeon, if they're not into that, then even though I love this design, maybe they might not be into this particular dungeon, just as a overall review of the themes here. But honestly, it just has so many cool different traps and things. I mean, there's runes on the walls that prevent teleportation, as well as physical penetration spells like pass through, what is it? Pass wall, I think is the name of it, where you go through the walls, kind of like the Tomb of the Nine Gods and the Tomb of Horrors, where it has to like have these rules because getting through the dungeon is a big part of it. There are some like laser mirror blasts you have to deal with. There are a lot of secret doors to suss out. There's a trap where if you try to get into the coffin and you open it up, there's this liquid that rises, and this red liquid that like boils over and has poisonous gases. There's a whole table of curses that if you basically do anything bad in the dungeon, like looting things or attacking one of the servants or cutting this one rope that just ties this door around without just carefully untying it, if you just like, frustratingly cut it because it takes a lot of skill checks, then you incur one of these curses, and these curses are terrible. Like, they're extremely bad. I forgot to mention, this is a level 10 dungeon crawl. That was an important piece of information. I just buried the lead. It's a level 10 dungeon crawl, so you are going to get some really interesting things happening, and the designer does not let up on how challenging this dungeon is, which is another reason why I think it's one of the more interesting dungeon crawls that I've reviewed, because a lot of them are tier 1 or like mid tier 2. This one is late tier 2, and it feels appropriately challenging and difficult, mostly with the way this curses can just horribly give you like permanent like stat debuffs, or you refuse all food and continue to eat dirt and rocks till their teeth are broken and they slowly starve to death over 1d20 days. Like, these are all just horrible curses. And it warns you about a lot of these things, which I like it. It doesn't try to just screw you over like original Tomb of Horrors. Like, it does have like these clues on the walls and different warnings and all these things where the players really have to be kind of brute forcing things in a bad way in order to really screw up and get a lot of these curses. One of my favorite aspects is this amazing falling floor trap. So you can see this kind of iconography here in the middle, which actually brilliantly explains exactly how this floor works, and it feels very much like almost not even a Zelda game at that point. It's almost more of like a platforming game or a roguelike, where you step on this section and it's at the ends of, and it's not at the beginning of the room, it's at the end of the room, and so everybody starts falling through. You have to make deck saves, then they flip, so you have to make a save, and then to try to trap people below, and then the whole floor lowers so the people are trapped below. And there's two sets of these traps. One side on the eastern side has like flammable gas which can choke you, and the other side of course has water. There are secret doors you can find to get inside in the under level where you can see all the pistons and actually work the traps, which I love that aspect, very much like the Tomb of the Nine Gods, where you can kind of get in the behind the scenes and see how the dungeon actually operates from a logical point of view. It's not all just magical mumbo jumbo. Just a fantastic job. And then there's this really creepy, again, there's been no real combat so far, by the way. We've gone through all these rooms and not had any real combat. The one tease you get is this one lioness, kind of lion humanoid character who shows up and has this cool stat block where she can like teleport through walls or reform from dust that's always on the ground and just kind of harry the players as somebody who's observing them and also maybe attacking them if they do the wrong things. Or you can really play it like just a DM monster that's clever enough, but also the players could reason with even if they wanted to. There's also these like mummified keepers that go around and give like water to all these scarab soldiers. And then in what I think is inspired, I don't know if the designer ever played State of Decay, but there's a kind of zombie in that game series that has no arms and it just walks around really creepily. And its whole thing is that it spots any of you, the player, it screams, and that summons a horde of zombies. You need to take them out very quickly. That is exactly what this Tomb Watcher is, by the way. And it's supposed to be this very creepy, like just shuffling down. And it's got, limited sight, doesn't have dark vision, and it's you can avoid it, but it's essentially a stealth game, but it's a stealth horror game where if this thing spots you, then it screams and it summons all these terrible like scarab soldiers that come at you. So you can try to take them out, but if you do that, you incur a curse. So the best way to do is to kind of either blindfold it or do something where you try to avoid it. But again, the DM can use this as a way to kind of harry the players at their own pace and have them literally patrolling around. Same as these guys, which these guys are the ones that deliver the water, and they're actually perfectly... these are the keepers, I believe. There's 2 of them on each side. And they're friendly. Like, they will talk to the players, and it's just kind of this weird, like, they're going about their tasks, or they're sleeping on the floor. But if you fuck with them, then you're up for curses and bad things. Really, really cool ideas all around. Hardly any combat, but again, you've got that kind of stealth patrol aspect of it, and you've got all these falling floor traps. You've got just fake like treasure rooms that are illusory, and if you try to work out this puzzle, this is even a fake puzzle where you push any button and just bad things start happening. It's just not meant for the players to jack with it at all. There's a water of life you can get that actually helps heal you, that they're using to give to all the scarab things and keep them around. It feels like the designer really took a meticulous look at like, how does this tomb actually function as a self-sufficient area? How do the guards work? How do the traps work? To where the traps can even reset, because there's that one lioness character who can kind of get around and do all those things. Everything makes sense, and it feels very immersive. I think that's probably the best term I can use to describe this dungeon crawl. It just feels like, a lot of dungeons have that ecology problem where it's like, oh, we want to put like an Achiog here, it doesn't really make sense with the goblins over here. Like, how do we, work out the logic of this dungeon? Doesn't feel like it's just a randomly generated, put monster in room or trap here. This one, it feels like everything makes sense, has been handcrafted, and it also feels very well paced, even though as a level 10 dungeon crawl, it's pretty light on combat. So you just have to know, players have to be able to want to deal with that and deal with more of an exploration trap-based dungeon than necessarily a combat one. There's a really cool sequence where they go through all these different symbols that do all these bad things, and the way you can counteract that is by realizing what the symbol is or does, and then you blast it with the opposite kind of element or thing. One of them is like a gravity thing that like pushes you to the ground and does damage. So if you can cast levitate on it or something, then you can counteract that. That's a really cool idea that combines like a trap and a puzzle into the same kind of room. Then you go into part 2 finally, after you've done like 2 of those falling floor puzzles and dealt with all the watchers and things and illusory traps. Then you go down to this awesome, like a massive just sandstorm room that feels like a real set piece for this dungeon, even though there's, again, no combat or enemies in here whatsoever. It's just huge howling sand winds blasting you, and you can see the excellent way the map art. This is the DM version, obviously. We do get player versions, which do not have any of this iconography on there. It's just you can use that to use as a VTT or just a battle map. And they slam you against the walls. You have to crawl through the space, and you're supposed to be panicking the whole time. Funny fact, there's not actually the big bad mummy boss at the end because he hasn't been resurrected yet. That's what the cultists are trying to do. Instead, you fight this really interesting boss monster called, starts with an N, I don't remember the name, Nicephorus, or maybe Nicephorus, I don't know. And he manifests as 8 different like ram-headed sphinx statues, which all animate and attack and have different stat blocks and different abilities. So instead you fight this pretty challenging, because that gets away the action economy thing too, right? Instead of fighting one big bad boss, you fight like 8 different creatures, which are all pretty beefy. By the way, notice how nothing I have mentioned so far has been an existing creature that you would know. all new custom creatures in this dungeon. I believe all of them. I'm not quite sure because I think even it mentions jackal wares, which I think do exist in one of the books, and yet this one gives you custom jackal ware stat blocks as well, and also like a priest version of that. So I think we get all new creatures, which is a really cool bonus, and they have in the appendix at the end all descriptions and all their stat blocks and things. So everything has been customized. And then at the end, look at this treasure. There's been no treasure throughout the dungeon. All of it is located at the end, but you can either take the designer's recommendations for treasure, obviously use your own. You're supposed to swipe this heart scarab. Your, of course, buddy is supposed to take it, and he's got a really cool thing where he can read this like poem. He's like, oh, it doesn't affect, I can disable the curse. And he reads a thing that basically it does work where it makes him immune to the curse, whereas the players would be cursed by it. And the curse summons all these enemies and things, and he can be proved like, oh, you need to let me carry it. So really cool idea. The designer thought about this, like how best can I try to make this work with, obviously suspicious players, probably not going to let their, this random NPC they just met be able to grab this sacred treasure that they need, even though maybe you've thought his story checks out. I think he literally like holds a ring of mind shielding or something that makes it so the players are supposed to make it harder to actually deduce his deception. But all of that feels like it can work very well, and I appreciate the designer really tried to include all that. Maybe the only slight bummer is it gets a pain in the ass to try to actually escape this place, especially if the players haven't played nice with the lioness character who can just let them escape. It's a little tricky because in order to raise this stone slab that is most likely closed on them at one point in the dungeon, they have to do that. They have to get down to the floor trap and find that secret area down below, and then be able to like push a button to make the floor trap raise up. I just feel like I'm kind of the school from like the Skyrim dungeon design and later, where you get to the end of the dungeon and there's always kind of a bullshit secret door you can push, and then you just get right out. And I realize that that's always bullshit, and you feel like, oh well, if I'd only known about this, of course the secret door is only on the button's only on the inside. But pacing wise, I always like that because you get to the end of this giant dungeon, and I feel like the last thing obviously the players want to do, and really me as the DM want to do, is make the player, and to me, be like, all right, now you got to backtrack through like 80% of the dungeon, possibly being affected by all of these things again, and then have to get your way out. It just feels like the action slows down. It's not nearly as fun compared to what we just went through to get here. So the designer instead made that a thing, is like, not only do you have to go through the dungeon again, but you have to then find a way to actually get above this stone slab, which has probably sealed off and made it even trickier to escape the dungeon. So that's a little bit tricky. I'm not going to include that as an official con, but that's just me saying as a DM who runs a lot of dungeons. I can't remember the last time where it was where I didn't just hand wave them leaving the dungeon, in other words. And this one is designed where you're not supposed to do that, which I found a little bit tedious. So then the adventure doesn't end because the players have their heart scarab. Hopefully the DM NPC has it, but if not, then the players have it, and the DM NPC can try to steal it or whatever else and ambush them. There's this boulders trap they can deal with, but otherwise they have to go to the site and deliver this item that they've gotten. So remember, the plot isn't just to go into this dungeon, get the item, and bring it to us. The plot is you have to go into the dungeon and bring this item to these evil cultists who are calling for a ransom in order to give back the children that they kidnapped. And all of that checks out, like that story checks out. They're there, the evil cultists. It just turns out that they're like most of the townsfolk. So that's the big like weird thing for the players to deal with. And of course, their allied buddy is also the townsfolk. They're all werejackals. I don't think your buddy is a werejackal though. He's trying to earn his wings, so to speak, trying to earn his jackal stripes. So a lot of the interesting wards and stuff in that dungeon are specifically designed to attack lycanthropes, and the players can get kind of teases of that throughout, and then when they make it to this final spot, they'll realize all the enemies are werejackals, except their buddy isn't quite yet one, but he's trying to earn that ability, I guess. And they have to actually rescue all these children from this big ritual, and the cultists are just there ready for the players to deliver, or hopefully the NPC and not the players, but since the players show up, it gets a little trickier for the villains, and it ends up being this pretty cool little epic battle at the end. So far more than what you would be able to do with a one-shot, I think. This is a big dungeon, and it's got those pretty big wrappings of a plot to where I think this would take you, probably 2 or 3 sessions, meaty sessions, but I was very, very impressed with the plot, with the The dungeon design, especially all these new creatures, which are very cool and custom built for, this Egyptian-like theme, but in a D&D way. And then we get a bunch of new magic items as well. And just the layout and everything is very good. I love even the little, Egyptian style symbols and things on here. It looks very cool. I was incredibly impressed overall with Real Dungeons number 2. All right, let's go over my pros and cons. Pro, an intriguing dungeon design that focuses on puzzles, explorations, traps, and ultimately immersion. It really feels like you are in a classic Egyptian tomb dungeon, and yet I didn't feel like it used necessarily any of the classic tropes that I was expecting. It didn't even do like mummies or, a bunch of sarcophagus lined up anywhere, or even a buried sand thing. It does like a sandstorm thing, which is a lot more interesting. But still does a lot with very, very cool trap designs, to where even if you weren't going to run this adventure, A, you could just run this dungeon. I think it's awesome. But B, you could take some cool ideas from this dungeon in order to construct your own custom-built dungeon. Even the falling floor trap alone is a very, very cool idea, and I thought was awesome, and really reminded me of some of the more interesting trap designs from the Tomb of the Nine Gods and Tomb of Annihilation, which is high praise, because I think that is an excellent dungeon design. Pro, compelling plot that features betrayals, lycanthrope cultists, and stealthy rescues. I really liked the overall plot structure to this dungeon. It's not just the dungeon crawl. A lot of adventures I read that are dungeon based is basically an excuse for you to get in the dungeon, and then once you do the dungeon, you're done with the story. And this one, you're not. You have that whole third part where you have to go and actually deliver it. There's that cool betrayal aspect. I love the town deception thing, where it turns out what they did is actually true. They did kidnap the children, but they kidnap their own children in a fucked up way, and they're just evil cultists who are descendants from, trying to get this ancient king back to power and resurrect the mummy and everything. And I love the fact that you actually never do fight the mummy. I guess I don't think that's actually included in the epilogue, where just in case the ritual actually completes. I think you're always meant to interrupt the ritual, and I don't think you're actually meant to have the mummy ever actually appear. You're just meant to fight those cults and everything, which I thought was actually weirdly refreshing in a way. It's because you expect that to have to happen, and instead you just get to actually thwart it and prevent it, and still have some cool boss fights and big battles. Pro, frequent sidebars with exploratory skill checks. So this is something I've skipped over, and I think the designer meant to do a little bit more with this. There's a part early on where it's like, hey, I'm also going to mention where traps and puzzles are, but I didn't ever see that kind of iconography appear again. But what I did see was all these little bits where you'll notice, like here on the right side of the screen, where it says Discovery, and it will have skill check options, or if you, in this case, like if you're a Cleric of Life Domain. So what this means is if a player asks about something, or if they want to make a certain skill check or something, then you, the DM, can immediately go and say, oh yes, here's a chance for you to, especially there's a lot of chances for like investigation, history, religion, because you're looking at a tomb, looking through hieroglyphics, and that's a very classic, I guess, trope. But the players, you always have like at least one knowledgeable person there who's going to be able to read things and know, how to decipher clues and puzzles and all that. And the designer realized that and includes a lot of those little, and they call them discovery moments, where it really helps out. I guess there's a symbol right there that's a trap symbol at the area. I guess they were smaller than I expected. That kind of dictates, okay, now I'm seeing the trap symbols, like right here, where all those little discovery moments are. So that makes it really helpful and kind of brings attention to it, rather than, I like the fact that it was in a separate sidebar. In other words, that was very helpful. Pro, full color battle maps with helpful DM versions. Awesome, awesome, awesome. I love this map. It works great. Sure, I would have loved if you had filled it out with actual details, but I can work with this. You give me this and you give me an awesome dungeon design on top of it, then that's still going to get a thumbs up for me, and I appreciate it. Pro, nearly all new. I said nearly. It might be all new custom creatures now that I think about it. I thought, because even the werejackals, I believe, are new. So the designer might have to follow up on that, but I'm going to go ahead and say this uses all new, because this is not the normal werejackal stat block. All new creatures. Every single creature is a custom stat block creature. I'm 90% confident in saying that. And a really, really cool way to scale everything up into a proper level 10 dungeon crawl without having to compromise any kind of creature types or modify the stat blocks. Just give me all new stuff. And obviously I can't comment on the balance because I haven't run the dungeon, but it seems like it all works very, very well and has some cool ideas there. Cons. I mentioned some just very slight criticisms here and there. Probably only the biggest one was the fact that you don't get to immediately leave the dungeon, but I'm not including that as official con. Honestly, I think it's pretty minor nitpicky stuff, and I don't think I have any major complaints here. I think it's just an absolutely fantastic product. top to bottom, I was very, very impressed with. Final verdict: the Well of Mitu Hatsep is a meticulously crafted, delightfully challenging level 10 dungeon crawl inspired by Egyptian tombs and backed by a rich history and a compelling story. Thank you to everyone for watching this video review. You can see my written review at roguewatson.com. You can watch more reviews and follow our own D&D adventures here on my YouTube channel. And you can support my work at patreon.com/roguewatson. Thank you.